Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eli Sachs. I am a professor of religious studies here at CU Boulder. I'm also the incoming director of the program in Jewish studies, and it's really my tremendous pleasure to welcome you tonight to this Embodied Judaism Symposium on Jews out west. One of the things that we like to say about Jewish studies here at CU is that we want to do Jewish studies differently. We want to reimagine what an interdisciplinary academic program in Jewish studies can be in the 21st century, and that's what tonight is about. It's about doing Jewish studies differently. First of all, we're trying to tell new stories. This is the fourth installment in our biannual Embodied Judaism series, where we try to think about Judaism not just from the perspective of ideas, but from the perspective of bodies, where we try to think about Jewishness in song, on the streets, and tonight outdoors. And it's part of a broader project where we try to tell this story about Judaism and Jewishness and bodies by using archives, both the archives we have here at CU, our post-Holocaust American Judaism collections, a wonderful partnership we have with the university libraries and other archives in the region. And that itself is also part of a still broader project of trying to really explore and rethink and reimagine how we talk about Jewish life here in America, to kind of highlight the richness and complexity and weirdness and wildness of American Jewish life. So we're trying to tell new stories, but we're also trying to kind of tell those new stories in new ways. One of the things that Embodied Judaism is about reimagining what an academic event can be like. So there will be presentations by scholars, but there will also be presentations by practitioners, and most importantly, all of you will be here, a kind of diverse group of faculty, staff, students, administrators, and the broader public. We are thrilled to be a Jewish Studies program at a public university and to be committed to taking what happens in Jewish studies and the libraries and the humanities and the university beyond the ivory tower and to have it be part of the civic life of this community. Right? So all of this is to say I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome all of you here tonight. I'm going to step aside in a moment. Before I do that, I want to offer a few words of thanks, and my colleague, Rebecca Wortel, will offer even more words of thanks shortly. So first, I'll be done talking shortly. So in terms of a few words of thanks, first I want to thank our wonderful partners here at the university, so the Center for the American West, the Department of History, the Department of Religious Studies, and in particular the university libraries. We are so thrilled to partner with the libraries on the post-Holocaust American Judaism collections and on events like this. And in a few moments, I will introduce Robert McDonald, the Dean of the Libraries, to also offer a few words of welcome. I also want to thank our partners and supporters from beyond the university. We are fortunate to have a wonderful cadre of supporters. Many members of our community advisory board are here tonight. And I want to in particular thank the Rose Community Foundation and the Bender Foundation for their support for this event, for our public programming, and for our post-Holocaust American Judaism programming. We are tremendously grateful. Rebecca will thank many people from across the university. I just want to thank a few people from within the program in Jewish Studies. So first of all, my colleague Beverly Weber. I'm actually on sabbatical this semester. Beverly is actually the director of the program this semester. I just get to show up at events like this and hog all of the glory. But Beverly has really kind of been a tremendous leader for the program this semester, and I want to thank her for all of the work that she's doing. I want to thank also from the program in Jewish Studies, Linda Park and Vanessa Fry, who have managed all of the aspects of tonight, from the technology to the logistics of travel, to the marketing, to the food, right? They've really made this event happen. I want to thank our wonderful musicians, Joe Lukasik, Guyan Long, Michelle Wolf, and of course, Eyal Rivlin, our senior Hebrew instructor and coordinator of Hebrew language instruction in the program in Jewish Studies. And last but not least, from within the program, I want to thank Rebecca Wortel, my wonderful faculty colleague, who has really managed and created and envisioned this event from the beginning. You'll hear from her shortly, but I really want to publicly thank her for her vision and her creativity and for her tireless care and commitment and devotion to putting this event together. We're really tremendously grateful. One last round of thank yous before I turn things over to Robert and then to Rebecca. We could not put together events like this. We could not hold events like this without your support, without you showing up tonight, and without you supporting the program. It's really such a point of pride and joy for us that we get to be a program that looks beyond the university and engages the broader public. So if you're interested in learning more about the kind of programming we offer, there's information outside. If you're interested in learning more about ways to support the program, to make a contribution to support the program, there's also information outside. You can also find me after the event. It's really a pleasure to welcome you here, and I now want to call up the Dean of the University Libraries, Robert McDonald.
Hi, everyone. It really gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this event today, and it's good to see such a wonderful turnout. I'm really happy, especially that the event's being held here in the Fisk Planetarium. When I started my position about a year ago, one of the first people I met on campus was John Keller, the director of the planetarium. And one of the things we ended up spending a good hour or more talking about was the wealth of the galleries, libraries, archives, and museums that we have on this campus, and how they can be natural partners for hosting engaging cultural activities for everyone, including audiences like this. We're really happy to make that connection, and I was able to connect John with Nan, and we dug deeper into what this actual wonderful planetarium can do with its facilities, and you can see some of that as it's flashing over your head right now. One of the key things that we found is we wanted to dig deeper into our areas of special collections, archives, and preservations department for some of our most unique things, and figure out how we could display them in events like this using this kind of a screen technology and showing them more in a VR kind of realm so we can open up that access for more people, just like we've done with our post-Holocaust American Judaism collections and the Jewish Studies program. So with that, I just want to thank a few people from my team, Kaliani Fernando, Andrew Violet, and Michael Ribity and his media team for helping us put this on tonight, as well as all the great support we've had from Nan Goodman, Eli Sachs, and Beverly Weber. Thanks so much. Enjoy.
Again, we're just so grateful to be able to partner with the libraries and draw on their wisdom and care and experience in kind of rethinking kind of how we tell stories about Jewish life and Jewish history. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to my colleague in Jewish Studies, Rebecca Wortel.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to see such a full room tonight, and I really appreciate you all coming out. This has been a long project that started pretty much the minute I took my position as an instructor in the program in Jewish Studies last year. And it was really a wonderful opportunity for me to get familiar with the archival collections that we have the privilege of working with here at CU Boulder, and also to incorporate some new ideas into the Embodied Judaism Symposium for this year. I hope you enjoy it. The idea of Jews out west really came as we were looking at the archival collections and the ways in which Jewish communities, particularly in this part of the country, have engaged with the outdoors, with the environment, and with expanding Jewish experience and Jewish observance beyond the walls of a synagogue, beyond the walls of a classroom, and to really become embodied in the environment in which we live, which, as you all know, is a very special one, a very special landscape. And so that is the point of this Embodied Judaism project. I have a whole list of thank yous for people, personal thank yous for people who've been on board from the very beginning of this project. First, Danielle Garrison, who served as my research assistant, graduate research assistant, and also brought a lot of creative vision to the library installation, which I hope you will all come and visit. It will be on display for hopefully the next couple of years. And a lot of that was her vision, so I'm very grateful. Also, Andrew Violet for graphic design and also coordinating the library exhibit. Kaliani Fernando and Megan Friedel from Library Special Collections. Beverly Weber, the interim director for Jewish Studies, for being an excellent editor and sounding board throughout this process. Linda Park and Vanessa Fry, also from Program in Jewish Studies, for all of their organizing and also publicity for this event. And all of my colleagues that are here from the Program in Jewish Studies. I'd also like to thank Patty Limerick from the Center for the American West, along with Kurt Gudejar for their guidance. Also, specifically from the Fisk Planetarium for allowing us to use this beautiful space for the first time and hopefully not the last. Tito Salas, Tom Muncie, and Max Galbraith, especially for all of the technical support here at the planetarium. From Media Services, Michael Ribberty, Kelly Brichta, and John Jazecki. Also, I need to thank the organizations outside of CU who allowed us access to their archival materials and also their personal collections for this project. Many of the archival photographs and relics that you'll see when you go to the exhibit at Norlin Library are on loan from these collections. Those include the Beck Archives at the University of Denver, the Camp Schwader Temple Emmanuel Archive collections, and also the JCC Ranch Camp, as well as Juli and Addison Kramer for use of their personal ranch camp collections. Just to give you a taste of the process of researching for this installation, we made a very quick retrospective slideshow that shows the vast amount of archival materials that we found related to this topic of the history of Jews out west. So we'll put that on, and then I will be right back to interview our first speaker. I'm Rebecca Wartell. I'm an instructor in the program in Jewish Studies and have been the lead faculty member on this Embodied Judaism project.
I'm Andrew Violet. I'm the graphic designer and exhibits coordinator for the University of Colorado Boulder Libraries and involved with this project. This is my 4th Embodied Judaism project that I've worked on.
My name is Danielle Garrison, and I was the graduate research assistant under Rebecca on this project and have been in the archives and helping to create the embodied installation.
It's a story about generations. It's a story about American history.
Trees,
It's
horses.
a story
An American
about
story.
Judaism
Mountains.
in
It's
America.
like Judaism is always
the
becoming.
creation of
Campfire
American
songs.
I'm not Jewish. I'm
but
curious
I
about
identify
your
these philosophies that
experience.
they bring about.
Right,
Our
a horse
experience
wearing a cowboy
working
hat.
within this project. We have so many
Post-war
layers.
history.
We have the archive, we have the writing, the historical narrative, the embodied exhibition, the symposium, and what stands out to you as being a notable aspect or experience within this process?
I think for me, looking at the other symposia that happened before, this one being the 4th one, they were all drawing on the archives, and so I wanted to make a new use of the archives. And it was the first time that one of the Embodied Judaism Symposia has been more local. I wanted to sort of bring it home and do something about Colorado and the West, as opposed to things that are either more abstract or events that took place in other parts of the country. So for me, doing like a local history was really an exciting aspect as a historian, and also just to, I think, give meaning to the people that will be engaged with the exhibit and the symposium, that may reflect some of their own like personal experiences rather than just
I
looking at a
was
phenomenon that
particularly
wasn't
moved by the
personally
embodied
connected to us.
quality of the exhibit, the idea of kinesthetic learning in nature, learning through the body, and I got to experience some embodiment in the installation of the art exhibit too, which was very much about creating a space and evoking clouds and a container that felt at once safe but also called one to a certain level of attention. And this is the exhibit Sanctuary. So to work with that was a way for me to embody my own education and engage with the narrative. And the narrative of a community, the Jewish community, educating their children through embodiment and through a relationship with the land, the Western United States, and by extension the entire nation, to me was also
Digging
very
through the
profound as a way
archive
of showing the continuity
feeling
of
really
the Jewish tradition.
feeling there to be a strong disjoint between the whole project, the idea of embodiment, and then going to an archive and having all the materials be either based on photography or the written word, and there was this missing link between the embodiment or the experience of the body within the archive materials. So really the challenge was to create a space that allowed the archive materials to feel or be felt through the body, everything to them in the present through their bodies, but they can connect to these ideas and to these authors and to these poets and the rabbi with these ideas and these intentions of finding information, as you were saying, Andrew, through the body, and the knowledge of the body.
Unique to perhaps this part of the country, especially, is this idea that we've sort of embraced of the outdoors as a classroom, as a place to learn, not only about the beauty of nature, but of history, of indigenous cultures, of survival in the outdoors, and to go outside the walls of a synagogue, specifically in this Jewish community context, and to find Jewish identity and Jewish meaningful experiences in nature is just something that a lot of people seek when they come to this part of the country. And we found so much evidence of that through camps and retreats and the pictures that people take, which just show the beauty of the natural environment and how much that infuses meaning into people's religious and spiritual lives. Okay, our first speaker then is Sarah Imhoff. She is the associate professor in the Department of Religious Studies and the Bourne's Jewish Studies program at Indiana University. She's the author of Masculinity and the Making of American Judaism. Sarah writes about religion and the body with a particular interest in gender, sexuality, and American religion. She's going to start off our conversation tonight with insights on the topic of Jews in the American West. Please join me in welcoming Sarah.
You think the theme tonight is about embodied Judaism and Jews in the West, but actually the theme tonight is thanking people, so I'm going to do that too. So thank you very much to Eli and Rebecca, and especially Linda, for making me so welcome here. Okay. So if I asked you to think about stereotypes of American Jewish men, you might think of this. Or if you're of a different generation, you might think of this. Yeah, so that's Woody Allen, and that's the character Harold Wolowitz. But you probably didn't think of this. Today we have lots of images of American Jews, both positive and negative. We might think Jewish men are smart, that they're funny, that they're good family men. We might think of Jews as excellent lawyers or teachers or doctors. But we're less likely to imagine Jews as farmers and cowboys. But if some American Jews had their way in the early 20th century, history might have gone pretty differently. So today I'll talk very briefly about two little pieces of history that show how American Jewish masculinity and the American West were very much intertwined. One of them is the Galveston movement, and the other one is how Jews identified with Native Americans. So, in the late 19th century, there were about 250,000 Jews settled across the then 38 United States. Some of them were from families who had been in the US for generations. Others were more recent immigrants from Germany and other places in Western Europe. They tended to be middle class. They spoke English. They sent their children to local schools. Then, especially after an 1881 pogrom, many Eastern European Jews came to US shores. Their numbers would soon dwarf the acculturated Jewish population. Between 1881 and 1924, almost 3 million Jews arrived in the US. So here's a familiar image of Ellis Island through which many of them came. The acculturated Jews had two kinds of feelings about these Jewish newcomers. On the one hand, they were committed to helping their fellow Jews who had experienced anti-Semitism and were seeking a new home in the United States. On the other hand, they were more than a little worried that these new immigrants, poorer, with less secular education, with weirder religious practices, they thought, and weaker and less manly bodies, they worried that these immigrants might give American Jews a bad name. And in fact, they weren't the only ones who worried about the health and manliness of these new immigrants. Our next image is an image of trachoma screening, so screening the eyes of immigrants that happened at Ellis Island. There was a real interest in making sure that the immigrants who came were of healthy and sound mind and body. So American Jews, part of this, had this worry too, and they created organizations and programs that might help the immigrants more closely live up to their ideas of what made a good American Jew. Some of these programs taught immigrants English, others sought to ensure that young women didn't live alone, and still others taught women how to clean and decorate their living spaces. One of these programs sought to help immigrants in a rather different way, by sending them to live in the American West. Though other institutions wanted to relocate Jews that were already living in American cities, the Galveston movement was distinctive because it proposed that the best method was to get brand new Jewish immigrants to bypass eastern seaports entirely. The movement operated from 1907 until the outbreak of war in World War I forced it to end in 1914. The immigrants traveled overland from Eastern Europe to Bremen, Germany, where they boarded a ship bound for Texas. After landing in Galveston, these new immigrants were sent to small towns throughout the American West and Southwest, where they could settle and acculturate into strong and productive American Jewish men. Just to give you an idea, here is an iconic image of what many Americans thought of as the pinnacle of American Jewish masculinity in this age. So the Galveston movement advocated Jewish settlement away from the crowds of large northeastern cities where these acculturated Jews were worried that the living conditions and the culture of the newer immigrants stoked anti-Semitism. But the movement also encouraged Jews to reconnect with the land from which they had, at least in the imagination of the more acculturated American Jews, become alienated. So not every Jewish man was a potential Galveston movement man. Official guidelines sought to exclude those who were Hasidic. They were deemed too irrational in their religion, and maybe they couldn't support themselves by making a living, or had poor physique, which is the phrase that they use, and they were deemed not healthy enough to support themselves financially or heteronormative families, which they were expected to have. But organizers generally imagined that most able-bodied Jewish men who expressed interest should be welcomed. And this is a photograph of some of the first crop of immigrants, except for the man who's second from the left, wearing the hat. That's Rabbi Henry Cohen, and we'll hear more about him later. If immigrant Jews were going to be properly manly, one of the first steps acculturated Jews wanted to take was to get them out of the city and into the country. Many Jews and non-Jews alike imagined that the city was bad, that it was morally and physically corrupting. Jewish social worker Sidney Teller, for instance, wrote about the immigrant community in Chicago. To the ghetto Jew, he wrote, held down for centuries, forgetting that physical health helps moral strength. The outdoor gymnasium for the girls and boys means a great deal toward getting back to the normal physical standard. With fair play and clean sport, the motto for boys, and healthy and graceful bodies, the ideal for girls, the gymnasia are crowded every day. He thought this was great. The gym served as a useful way to help boys become men, but it was only a limited fix to the problem that Teller and other acculturated Jews saw. The Galveston movement proposed what it saw as a more thorough solution. Instead of hunching over a sewing machine or a Talmud for hours on end as they did in cities, Jewish immigrant men could go out west and connect with the real American land. And as this hints, the Galveston conversation was really a conversation about men. Across the nation, women were much less likely to immigrate without accompanying family members, and Galveston attracted an even higher percentage of men. Through 1910, 84% of Jews arriving by way of Galveston were men, while in New York it was 57%. The Galveston movement's official standards, the ones they disseminated in Kiev, said, "The emigrant must not be over 40 years of age. If married, the emigrant, his wife and children, must be strong and healthy and able to satisfy the requirements of the immigration laws of the USA." That the emigrant was a man went unquestioned. Women and children weren't even allowed to emigrate without a male relative. So Galveston movement officials really cared about these men's bodies too. They wanted them to become healthy, strong, and attached to the land, and they were concerned that the arriving immigrants would be denied because of weak and unmanly bodies. One 1910 conflict just demonstrated how important this poor physique problem was for establishing the quality of Jewish men as potential American men. Galveston leaders David Bressler and Rabbi Henry Cohen faced an incident with Dr. Korput, who was the medical examiner at the Galveston port. Bressler wrote to the judge and philanthropist Nathan Beecher, "We're having trouble with the medical authorities at Galveston in the matter of aliens who are not, so to speak, perfect physical specimens. In a number of instances, the enforcement of the law with regard to persons liable to become a public charge and poor physique has been unfair and unjust in the extreme." Bressler explained that he had it on good authority that Korput had several times expressed particular distaste for Jews. Upon learning that someone had heard Korput making anti-Jewish remarks, Max Kohler suggested filing an official complaint. He decried this expansive category of, quote, likely to become a public charge on account of medical findings against them because of the lack of alleged muscular or physical development. So this nebulous and poorly defined category allowed medical examiners to keep Jews out of the United States because of their subjective, in the opinion of the doctors, lack of muscles. In this way, medical knowledge, which we might think of as objective and scientific, actually functioned ideologically. Kohler knew that the doctors' reports and statistics shaped ideas about Jewish men and how well they conformed to the ideals of masculinity. The Galveston leaders knew that Jewish men's weaknesses and alienation from the land worked as anti-Semitic tropes. And yet, they also shared the idea that good men were strong, healthy, and had a connection to the land. With this, I'll turn to the other piece of history I promised. When I was going through Rabbi Henry Cohen's archives, because I was interested in the Galveston movement, I came across a curious pamphlet. It was carefully preserved alongside his personal correspondence and family announcements. And here it is. Comparisons of the wild tribes near Galveston a century ago to ancient Semitic customs. What? So I did some research. It turns out that Cohen's fellow Jewish Galvestonian, the physician and amateur historian Joseph Osterman Dyer, had written the pamphlet in 1916. Its pages detailed the religious customs and social arrangements of several tribes. In a typical passage, Dyer wrote, "Again, the stocky, copper-colored, short-haired Koshuta physician and his confrere, the tall, slim, yellow-faced, long-haired Karankawa shaman, were," ready for this, "worthy successors of the learned rabbis who dispensed magic and medicine and expounded religious and civil law after the temple." Yeah. Dyer explained what he imagined to be striking religious similarities of the ancient Israelites and of Jews of centuries past to Galveston's wild tribes. So why did Dyer tie the customs of these uncivilized tribes to his own religion? And why, I wondered, did this pamphlet capture Rabbi Cohen's attention? These comparisons of Jews and Indians, and here I'm using the term Indians intentionally because most of them were not about real Native Americans, but rather an imagined people, often called Indians in this literature. They allowed Jews to tap into issues that really mattered to them: race, religion, national citizenship, diaspora, and peoplehood. They also allowed Jews to stake claims about masculinity. Such an affinity appealed to acculturated Jews like Cohen because it promoted a masculinity that could be both Jewish and American. Specifically, identification with Indians helped Jews to portray themselves as brave and resourceful and quintessentially tied to the American land. We can see this reflected in some other ways Jews interacted with Native American culture and history. Jews and non-Jews speculated whether Indians might be part of the 10 lost tribes. Jews portrayed Native Americans on stage, including Fanny Brice's Ziegfeld Follies, which included the song "I Am an Indian," and Moshe from Nova Scotia, which is about a Jewish, quote, Eskimo. And some Jews, like many other white US Americans, dressed up as Indians. As David Kaufman has recently described, playing Indian was widespread at Jewish summer camps. And I learned you should come see him because he's going to speak in February here at CU Boulder. In the end, I think that Dyer wrote the Wild Tribes pamphlet and Cohen kept it, and other Jews imagined links with Indians because these strategies helped them claim a masculinity that was brave and resourceful and inherently connected to the American land. But these Jewish identifications with Indians, of course, have a different ethical valence than the Galveston movement. They often involved setting Indian cultures and peoples in the past, thus feeding a myth of Native American disappearance. Comparisons of Judaism with the religions of the wild tribes made Judaism out to be the better religion, rational with universal elements, as opposed to pre-modern and tribal elements of Native American religion. And playing Indian often meant reenacting the colonial drama of whites, where Jews included themselves, displacing indigenous people. So rather than dialogue about culture, Jews often instrumentalized Indians and their cultures as a way to promote their own Americanness. And part of that Americanness was American masculinity. Of course, not every Jew came out west or compared himself to Native Americans. Given the cultural narrative of the Western, perhaps we should be surprised that any did. In his 1895 essay, Owen Wister, the guy who basically invented the genre of the American Western, describes cowboys in terms that, well, you'll see. The cowboy is a Saxon boy of picked courage who alone could defeat the encroaching alien vermin that turns our cities to Babels and our citizenship to a hybrid farce, who degrade our commonwealth from a nation into something half pawn shop, half broker's office. So, did you catch that? The real cowboy fights these things that we recognize as anti-Semitic tropes. So, Jews were no obvious cultural fit for the West. And yet, many Jews embraced US narratives of the West, and they hoped that this embrace would help them cultivate a masculinity that appealed not only to them, but also made them acceptable to other Americans. So we might say that in a quest for masculinity, Jews played both cowboys and Indians. Thanks.
Maybe we can just get the lights up. Thank you so much, Sarah. We've got about 5 minutes for questions and answers for each speaker. So we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. There's a couple of people, Beverly and Danielle, with microphones. It's hard for me to see, but if you have a question, please raise your hand. For Sarah, I see one over there, and I will keep track of time.
Yeah, you didn't mention how many Jews came through Galveston in this project.
About 10,000. I also think it's pretty clear that other Jews came through Galveston because of this movement too. So there were plenty of Jews who came through the port that weren't explicitly connected to the movement, but because they knew other people who did or knew of this. So yeah, the movement, about 10,000, which is not a giant number.
Is there a population of Jews now who still live in Galveston who have this heritage?
Yes, there's definitely a Jewish community in Galveston. The movement really tried to take the people and not keep them in Galveston, but take them and send them on trains to the rest of the American West. And so most of the families who are descended from people who immigrated through Galveston are actually in other cities. But one of the reasons that Galveston worked as a port was because there was already an established Jewish community there. And that community did, even though the Galveston movement didn't want it to, occasionally absorb some of those immigrants too. So yes, there still is. And there are definitely people, when I talk about this, there's usually somebody who's like, I have family that immigrated through Galveston. So anecdotally, I can tell you there are totally people out there.
So I'm wondering, in the field of Western history, there was an idea for a while that recent settlements were so not settled that there was less anti-Semitism, that the unstableness of Western American communities might actually have had that hopeful effect or positive effect. Is that still a standing idea, that there's actually that the Western opportunity really does come from the fact that people haven't really hardened into line-enforcing communities?
I think that's definitely true in many ways. One of the other things that happens is out west, Jews can become unquestionably white in a way, and the Jewishness, even if Jewishness is a white race for other people, sometimes it's a lesser ranking white race. But if you're in Montana and you're not African American or Native American, then you're pretty much white. So there's definitely that racial element that suggests that racial anti-Semitism was probably far lesser in these Western towns, which suggests that maybe also social anti-Semitism would have been lesser too.
Cool. There's no other questions. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I will introduce the next speaker. Thank you so much. Next, we have a mother-daughter team. We have both Addison and Juli Kramer. I'll read each of their bios. Addison is an author here from Colorado, even though now she's left and lives in Connecticut. She has a degree in history, honors, and international relations from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and continues to pursue her passion in creative writing, drawing inspiration from her family and life in Colorado, and also her travels and volunteer work abroad. Addison recently published From the Horse's Mouth, which is a book about the history of the Jewish Community Center Ranch Camp here in Elbert, Colorado, as told through her interviews with all of the camp's previous directors. One of which is her mother, Juli Kramer, who was the director of the JCC Ranch Camp from 1994, 95, and then again from 98 to 2002. She has a PhD in curriculum and instruction with a cognate in counseling psychology. Most recently, Dr. Kramer was the director of curriculum for the Sun Ching Ling schools in Shanghai. As a practitioner and educator, Juli focuses on developing student creativity, critical thinking skills, and self-efficacy. Please welcome Addison and Juli Kramer.
And we'll continue the trend of thank yous. We feel so honored and happy to be part of this and share our experience of Jews out west with you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I would like to start a little bit talking about the book From the Horse's Mouth. As Rebecca mentioned, this is a book that covered the history of the camp from the perspective of 20 of the camp's 26 directors. It was an amazing project to get to see how the camp evolved, and in conjunction with the interviews with the directors, I also worked a lot with archival evidence from the camp. This included everything from photographs, scrapbooks, songbooks, programs, paraphernalia such as t-shirts, old rodeo programs, everything kind of around the camp history to create this really vibrant picture. And in starting the book, one of the things that was the most important to me to start with was, why a ranch camp? It's kind of a funny thing to have as Jews. And in 1952, a bunch of members of the JCC in Denver said, you know what, we've got a pretty decent population of 1,800 Jews in Denver, and we don't really have anywhere to send the kids. Sure, there's Schwader, which was founded in 1950, but this doesn't really serve the Orthodox population as much. And for them, it was really important, and they realized that the overwhelming number of children, especially those of Orthodox homes and those living in West Denver, where income was lower, do not have anywhere to go out of the city during the summer. And this is that idea that Judaism, especially out west, is hugely connected to the nature that's around us. And in 1952, they got incredibly lucky and found 175 acres in Elbert that they could purchase to start this camp. And the camp had an even greater tie to history because it is the site of the Hubbard Ranch, or the Ten Sleep Ranch. It started in 1898, and this camp was this beautiful place in the woods, in the Black Forest, where they've got these rustic cabins that are already existed. They didn't have to put in a lot to build it up. And there's still the wonderful Hubbard Ranch sign on the steps to really connect them to this idea of real cowboys. But why Western? They wanted to be a unique experience that linked the Jews of the Denver area to their Western heritage. They came here in wagons. Many of them were from settler families or new immigrants, and they wanted to be part of this American experience. Like many Jews of the diaspora, they wanted to belong, and they wanted to feel American and especially feel Western. The founders of the camp wanted it. They saw these two things as being integral to the Jewish Denver community, being Western and being Jewish. And to have this aspect, they had ideas for activities such as growing alfalfa, taking care of horses, participating in roundups, branding cattle. But some of these activities didn't actually take place. Many of them did, such as taking care of horses. There was also the other aspect, though. In what way did they want the camp to be Jewish? They wanted it to be inclusive. Schwader Camp was for Reform Jews, and there wasn't a kosher kitchen, which meant that a lot of conservative families and Orthodox families wouldn't be able to go. They also wanted this to be a little bit different. They wanted Judaism to come naturally as part of the programming, and they wanted the students to also connect to Judaism outside of the classroom and to connect with it in a little bit more of an ethereal sense. There were services that were held outside, and they wanted to really have the campers appreciate this idea of God being everywhere and in everything, and that included nature. Another aspect is they wanted it not just for Jewish religion, but Jewish culture. Many of the Jews that came to this camp were the only Jew in their school, sometimes the only Jewish kids in their town. There were Jews from New Mexico, Nevada, Texas, Colorado, California. There were even some Jews from New York, and these were the few Jews that really had a Jewish community outside of the camp. And it was really important for the kids to have this space to feel proud and to feel like strong Jews. I'll pass it over to my mother now.
So similar to camp trends going on in the nation. So we're back in the 1950s. We're at a time just after the Holocaust, the baby boom generation, people coming home. Many people were looking to get children outside. So the ranch camp was very strong in this regard as well. There's also this burgeoning of religious camps as well, not just the Jewish camps, but Christian camps, camps of many different denominations. And so they were very much on trend with that. Also on trend was getting kids active, letting them get messy and dirty and get outside. This was something that was coming on the heels of television, right? Becoming more important in the home, movies, a lot of the technologies in cars. And so they felt getting connected back to nature, and ranch camp was very much in that trend. Ranch camp was similar to Jewish camps in that they wanted to build Jewish community, yet it was a very different experience. Many camps back east had waiters and people that cleaned up for you, and it was very neat and tidy, and you had different activities that weren't as messy as mucking out a stall or grooming a horse or hiking in the mud, walking in the rain. So it was very much the idea of not just having Jewish studies, working with a rabbi, being inside. It was very much about the land. Over and over again, we talk about ranch camp and the land because it was so significant. Addie's going to share a story from one of her interviews.
There's a really beloved camp tradition, and it was really exciting for me to get to find where it started from. And it came from a director called Albie Siegel. And he said, "I told every camper to rub their hands in the dirt and rub the dirt on their jeans and have their parents not wash the jeans until they come to camp the next year." And the importance of doing this was to have this physical connection to the space of ranch camp. It was more than just the community. It really is the, almost 400 acres that the camp is now, to have that rootedness and connection, and to also have that connection to the space and the campers throughout the year while you're gone. These are some of the camp activities they had, such as horseback riding, gold panning, archery, the typical camp activities.
Another aspect of the camp that was intimately tied to the land was this connection to the Native American history and experience that happened there. You'll see on the top a picture of kids dressed up as Native Americans. And unlike this idea of running around like the Cowboy Indian movie, ranch camp was like many other Western camps of the time, fighting against this trend. It's a progression of growth where they were trying to understand people who lived on the land before them. Campers couldn't help but walk around and see arrowheads all the time, pottery shards, the artifacts of these cultures. And that was the same for many camps in Colorado and in the Four Corners area, New Mexico and Wyoming also. These artifacts raise questions, and you'll look, in the 1960s, there was this Pathfinder quiz where they were talking about what it meant to be a person in the West, and you'll notice the questions really focused on how these other cultures lived. What were the names of these peoples who were here before us? What was the experience? How did they interact with the land, and what can we learn from them? In many ways, it might be seen as kind of a primitive, simplistic experience of these cultures, but it was growth. It was something different something that had questions and people wanted to know more. The other picture was a picture of a teen village artifact, a pillow, flash all the way to the 2000s, where actually in the 70s this also began, where campers on trip camps would go experience and live and work with people that were on the reservations today. What the experience was of peoples who lived in the West prior to people coming in the 1800s, it was something new for them to ask questions about and wonder. And what were their lived experiences? Campers would do live with them and do major projects and understand. So it was a very interesting concept for them to be tied to the land.
One of the other ways that the campers really tied themselves to the land was through this idea of Jewish meditation, and genuinely Jewish meditation. It was something that was incredibly integral to all campers' experiences, whether or not they understood that's what it was at the time. The Baal Shem Tov, who was a Jewish mystic, was incredibly tied to this idea of davening and meditation, and he was, supposed to be able to talk to animals. And while campers couldn't talk, we did very often daven with the horses at camp, who would walk right up during Friday night services held outside to be there at the fence. And it was this incredibly amazing experience. One of the camp directors from the 60s all the way up to my time as a camper in the 2000s would come to camp and tell this story called Tumbala. And it started with Jews meditating in the woods in a very specific way, meditating on building a fire, meditating to get to that spot, and meditating on this nigun, which is this lyricless song. And, eventually the only thing they remember is the nigun, Tumbala, 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 la. And that was, something that was incredibly important to us. And we always started Shabbat services at one area of the camp, starting with this nigun and then moving forward. But camp was not isolated. It was part of the rest of the world. And Eastern meditation forms came into, especially kind of through the 60s and 70s. Now at the camp, there was opportunities to do yoga, Tai Chi, and other forms of Eastern meditation. But all of this came together to form this really unique Jewish identity. It was always easy at my synagogue to know which kids went to Jewish camp, and specifically which kids went to ranch camp, because we would all stand up at the same point during services at a little age, and we'd all be doing the same hand motions, and the rabbi would get mad at all of us. And some of the rabbis would actually call the camps, and they would say, can you please make sure that your campers know to not do the hand motions when they come back home, just for camp. And we never listen. I still do them today, but much more under the radar, because that's who we are. And it was this idea that they could be Western and strong and, as Sarah was saying, in these strong Jewish bodies, and have this pride of being this Western Jew, no matter where they were, no matter where they went. And it's this Jewish culture and heritage of this connection to the West that is a really, truly unique experience to the ranch camp. And I was so happy to be able to be a part of it. For those of you that are interested, I will be here after to answer any questions about the book. And we also have some if you would like to take a look. Thank you so much for your time.
We'll take a few more questions from the audience for either Addison or Juli. I see a couple of hands up around.
So first of all, I sent my two daughters to ranch camp for a total of 12 years, so thank you. And you talked a little bit about Teen Village, and what I always liked about it is as the kids got older, there was more and more of an outdoor component culminating in Teen Village, which now is like a 3-week camping trip. Has that always been the case since the beginning of the camp?
That idea has always been a case since the beginning of the camp. The idea of trip camps really started in the middle, or really the late 1960s, starting in the 1970s to really pick up steam. My mom was fortunate enough to be a tasker when she was there in the 70s. My dad also went on task and was part of the Great Thompson Flood in 78, which scared the directors. Getting stuck up there. But it's grown and improved over the years, but it's always been a really important part to get the kids out and experiencing and really in nature, not just in nature in the camp.
And I would just add, progressive challenges is a definite part of that. So you start with a 3-day trip, then a week trip, then the 3-week trip. Yeah.
Addison, could you show us the hand gestures?
Yeah. So some of them are, so for Odevo Shalom Aleinu, there's, you do kind of this and then that and this one. My favorite, though, is for Adon Olam. One of the ways we do Adon Olam is Adon Olam, Asher Malah, Paterim Kol, do-do-do-do, Yitzir Nira, Ding Dong, Late Nasa, perhaps a call, shoo, as I'm a Leshimoni cry, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, Adon Olam.
Just for full disclosure, I'm also a ranch camp alumna. I spent 10 summers out there. My mom was a camper there from the beginning of when it opened its doors, and went on task also. But we're going to all take ourselves back to camp now for a few minutes in between speakers to have some more wonderful music to sing along with. So Eyal and team, please come back up to the stage.
Shalom, friends. So, as Rebecca mentioned, my name is Eyal Rivlin, and I lead the Hebrew language program here at CU. And I was asked to facilitate an embodied Jewish summer camp experience as an interlude between the sessions. Since I grew up in Israel, I never went to summer camp in the States, so I've been conducting some research with my students. And what I repeatedly heard is that music is a key component of the camp experience. So are you all on board with going on a musical journey together here? Okay, great. So a few guidelines for that. Music at camp is not passive. It's not a performance. Rather, it is a shared musical, communal expression. And all voices are welcome here. Harmonies are welcome. Clapping along is welcome. Those hand gestures are welcome. And I thought we'd start with what is probably the most well-known Hebrew camp song of all generations. Apparently, it's been a hit for approximately 3,000 years, all the way to the days of King David. These words are from Psalm 133. Oh, good. And you can follow along with the Hebrew or the transliteration in English, or just lie along. That's considered kosher in Jewish sing-along, I've learned. And we'll medley a few melodies of this song from the different decades. So here we go. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד, 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 שבת אחים גם יחד. And it turns out camp songs don't have to be in Hebrew. Turns out each generation of campers had contemporary songs that they would sing together. And when I met with Rebecca to choose songs for this evening, she looked through old camp songbooks. And apparently this next song was a favorite in the 70s and appeared in a number of camp songbooks and probably continues to be a favorite. Cat Stevens, who wrote the song, described growing up on the west end of London and never seeing the moon on its own as he was surrounded by street lamps, until one day traveling as a teen on a holiday to Spain and seeing his own shadow cast by the moon. Can we get a moon image here, Max, or any moons up there? All right. And so let's imagine that we are young campers singing under these starry skies. Oh, there we go. Woo! Getting closer, closer. Great. Thank you. Wow.
Perfect.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Can you see your shadow cast by the moon? Okay, here we go. I'm being followed by a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow, leaping and hopping on a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow. And if I ever lose my hands, lose my plow, lose my land, oh, if I ever lose my hands, oh, if I won't have to work no more. And if I ever lose my eyes, if my colors all run dry, oh, if I ever lose my eyes, oh, I won't have to cry no more. I'm being followed by a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow, leaping and hopping on a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow. And if I ever lose my legs, I won't moan and I won't beg. Oh, if I ever lose my legs, oh, I won't have to walk no more. And if I ever lose my mouth, all my teeth, north and south, yes, if I ever lose my mouth, oh, if I won't have to talk. Did it take long to find me? I asked the faithful line. Did it take long to find me? And are you gonna stay the night? I'm being followed by a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow, leaping and hopping on a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow. Let's continue our time travel and move forward a few decades. And chances are, if you went to camp after 2008, I know that's not many of us
my children
here, but maybe your kids or your grandkids. The next song was the anthem of hope of these last 10 years. This song was performed by a Jewish reggae rapper, beatboxer, Matisyahu. And I remember him singing this song at the Boulder Theater and calling up all the children that were there to join him on stage for the closing song. Here we go.
Sometimes I lay under the moon and thank God I'm breathing. Then I pray, don't take me soon, 'cause I am here for a reason. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play one day. This all will change, treat people the same. Stop with the violence, down with the hate. One day we'll all be free and proud to be under the same sun, singing songs of freedom like yo. For the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day, yeah. Whoa, whoa, one day, one day, one day, yeah.
How are we doing on our musical journey here? Good?
You
have
good.
energy for 2 more songs? Okay, good. So this time we'll be traveling far back in time. This next song was written about 150 years ago. It's a classic Western folk song, sometimes called the unofficial anthem of the American West. Dr. Brewster M. Higley of Smith County, Kansas, wrote the lyrics in the poem My Western Home in 1872. And in 1947, it became the Kansas State Song. In 2010, members of the Western Writers of America chose it as one of the top 100, as the top 100 song of all time. And we were going to rename it Shalom on the Range. The extra syllable doesn't serve the music very well, so we'll sing the original, but Shalom on the Range, here we go.
Give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. How often at night, when the heavens are bright, with the light of those glittering stars, have I stood there amazed
praised and asked as I gazed if their glory exceeds that of ours. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Woo. Thanks for adding your voices there. So we're coming in for a landing, and typically most sing-alongs end with a hopeful song for peace. And I first heard this next song in 1997 while I was a student at Tel Aviv University. And the band Sheva came to perform at our campus. They were a group of musicians of Jewish and Muslim backgrounds singing together in Hebrew and Arabic and playing exotic world instruments. And the response from communities all around the world was incredible. And it has become a favorite for many communities. So join us as we bring this sing-along to its grand finale. This is where you get to do those hand motions. And I also want to thank the musicians who have generously joined me here. Guyan Gregory Long on percussion. And Michelle Wolf, who can harmonize any sound that anyone makes. And the amazing Joe Lukasik on clarinet.
Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom. Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Salam. Kol ha'olam, salam, salam, yeah, yeah, salam, 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 aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam, salam. Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu. Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Salam, 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 aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam, ya, 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 ya. Salam, 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 aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam. Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, Od yavo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Odiavo shalom aleinu, odiavo shalom aleinu, odiavo shalom aleinu ve'al salam, aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam, 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 aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam, salam. Odiavo shalom aleinu, odiavo shalom aleinu, odiavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam.
Thank you.
So did you feel like you were at a campfire sing-along, everyone? Thank you so much to the beautiful musicians. I'm going to move along quickly so we stay on schedule. I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Rabbi Marc Soloway, who is the rabbi of the local Boulder synagogue congregation Bonei Shalom. He's been there since 2004 and also serves on the boards of Camp Ramah of the Rockies and Chazon, the largest faith-based environmental organization. He's been very involved in the local food and sustainability movement and is an integral part of Boulder's Jewish Goat Co-op, which I think he'll talk about. Rabbi Soloway was a student of Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi and was the last person to receive a private secondary rabbinic ordination from Reb Zalman before his passing in 2014. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Soloway.
So thank you for inviting me. So the first question that I have to ask is how a nice Jewish boy from a northwest London suburb who grew up like Cat Stevens, not really seeing much of the moon, ended up in bike shorts and tefillin in Moab in Utah, mountain biking his way through the White Rim Trail, which is where this picture is taken. And when I come to think about that question and answer that question, it's not really my story. It's a contemporary Jewish American story, which really tells the story of thousands, tens of thousands of people from all ages and backgrounds who have been touched by transformative Jewish experiences connected to the outdoors, connected to food, to farming, and to the environment. And the people of the book have become the people of the bike. Torah and prayer have moved beyond walls, and urban Jews everywhere have reconnected to a more land-based spirituality. Personally, my own love of skiing and mountain biking and just being outside in general are the things that have kept me here in Colorado all these years. I thought I was just coming here for a couple of years, and I've been here 15. And also have kept me in a much more integrated Jewish practice that brings me into my body and into the outdoors, and not, of course, to forget the wonderful weekly goat milking experience every Sunday morning at the Boulder JCC. In March of 2014, 5 months after the Pew's gloomy Portrait of Jewish Americans study, which doomed synagogues to a certain death, several organizations, including the Jim Joseph Foundation, the Rose Community Foundation here in Colorado, the Schusterman Family Foundation, the UJIA of Federation of New York, and Chazon, sponsored another study. And this study was called, wait for it, Seeds of Opportunity, a national study of immersive Jewish outdoor food and environmental education. And it became known as the famous Joffe Report, because as Chazon's founder and CEO, my friend Nigel Savage, said, the Jewish world was ready for another acronym. So Joffe stands for Jewish Outdoor Food farming, and environmental education. And it confirmed what many of us already knew, that vibrant connections to Judaism and community were being made across all demographics through experiences in the natural world, through hands-on, thoughtful, and engaging Jewish content, like learning about Jewish harvest rituals, like starting a Jewish community-supported agricultural program, which we did almost 10 years ago here in Boulder, greening our institutions, creating new models of community where Jewish learning and Jewish practice became more and more integrated into a deep love and care for the physical world. These communities have brought together rabbis and educators and activists and farmers and entrepreneurs and everybody else. And of course, this phenomenon is not solely a Jews out west thing. And the work of Chazon, which, as you heard, is America's largest faith-based environmental organization, has been the hub of many of these experiences on both coasts and everywhere in between. In Colorado, we've seen the flourishing of the newest of the major Jewish summer camps. We heard wonderful stories about the JCC Ranch Camp, Ramah of the Rockies, which I've been on the board of since it founded. And this amazing image here, which says, Etgar Baramah, challenge yourself in Ramah, which is really the whole mission of the camp, to bring this incredible outdoor experience. And the Ramah movement, which is the camping movement, the Jewish camping movement of the conservative movement, Ramah of the Rockies was the first speciality camp that really had this incredible outdoor program. And it's nestled in the mountains of Deckers, Colorado, the site of the Hayman Fire. And it is amazing at building community and integrating those outdoor adventures where every other week the campers go out on these back country adventures on mountain bikes and horses and rock climbing, and they combine that with this great spirituality, a Jewish spirituality. We heard about the Baal Shem Tov. Well, his great-grandson, Addison spoke about the Baal Shem Tov, the great mystic, and his great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, introduced this concept of hitbodedut, which is where campers, people go out and hang out with trees and just open their hearts in prayer, and that's become a big practice at Camp Ramah. And the campers at Camp Ramah deliberately were called the Chalutzim, which means the pioneers out on this western frontier. And Ramah of the Rockies also operates Bamidbar, which is the first and currently the only Jewish wilderness therapy program for at-risk young adults. And that's been a very powerful program that started just a couple of years ago. In Boulder here, of course, we have all kinds of programs. I want to mention Adventure Judaism in part because the founder, Rabbi Jamie Korngold, the Adventure Rabbi herself, had a very sad loss with the loss of her mother, and she's actually tonight sitting Shiva, so I want to mention her and bring her into this space because she's been doing outdoor Jewish experiences for a long time. For almost 10 years, as I said, the Boulder Jewish community across a few different congregations and the JCC have partnered with Red Wagon Organic Farm to bring the first Jewish CSA, community-supported agriculture program. We've got to know our local farmers and experience during the growing season every week these amazing locally grown organic vegetables. The Boulder JCC is the only JCC in the world that has a full-time director of farming and sustainability, Farmer Becker, some of you know her, and Milk and Honey Farm grows a lot of food every year, which is donated to local food pantries, and also houses the Beit Izim, which is the goat corp, which has been mentioned before. My own community has taken a pledge for this year to plant, in honor of the year that we're in, 5,780 trees, either with our own hands or by supporting reforestation projects. We're about a third of the way there already. And the list goes on in ways in which the Jews of Colorado are connected to the earth and connected to the outdoors. I love trees, whether they are trees in South Boulder in the fall, or trees in the winter in Grand Targhee, Wyoming, which is where this picture was taken, and where this picture was taken. There are some frightening texts in our Jewish tradition that seem to imply that we put our lives at risk. We are chayav benafsho, according to this text, liable for death if we sacrifice our learning of Torah to appreciate nature. If we stop and say, what a beautiful tree or what a beautiful field, this text says that we're liable for death. But so many people, starting with Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Palestine, and others, radically, and I choose to radically reread this text, to say hefsik means to break. If we separate our intellectual and our spiritual Jewish practice from the natural world, we are killing ourselves and we're killing our communities. That's the clue, hefsik. It cannot be a break. It must be an integration and a flow. I love being on the trail, whether I'm on a bike or whether I'm on skis. And in those moments, I strive to be conscious and I try to be connected to my unique Jewish spirit. When you walk along the way, familiar words to some of us from the first paragraph of the Shema, our central prayer. When you walk along the way, interpreted in the mystical tradition to be having awareness, having consciousness, whatever it is we're doing, whether we're on a trail, hiking or biking or skiing, or whether we're just walking down the street, and being outside in nature somehow helps us have that awareness. In all of your ways, on all of your paths, in all of your ways, know that transcendent being that keeps us going and keeps us breathing. This is a trail on Camp Ramah that links one part of the camp to the tents, the Ohalim, where the Chalutzim, where the pioneer campers sleep. And as they walk through this trail, they see a number of different quotes. And one of them, of course, is from our beloved Reb Zalman, who is honored in so many ways in this institution and by so many of us in Boulder. And he says, God is always present. The question is, how present are we? And it just feels like a relationship, a changing relationship to the outdoors, to being outside, to farming and to food and to just being in the trees has reframed us, reframed our understanding of Jewish life. For generations, so much of the Torah has been this kind of abstract teaching. There are so many teachings in Torah about farming and about agriculture, and they've all been theoretical. But suddenly, at this moment in Jewish life, there's a reconnecting to these deep and sometimes radical values in our texts through a more immediate relationship to the land, as we have seen through the sprouting of Jewish farms, Jewish communities supporting their local farmers, and so on and so on and so on. This is true of the earth, and it's also, in many cases, it's changed our relationships to animal and animal agriculture. And who doesn't love goats?
Thank you, Rabbi. Are there a few questions from the audience? I'd like to ask one while people are thinking.
Yeah.
I asked Rabbi Soloway if he could talk a little bit more about some of the ancient Jewish practices and connections to the environment, to agriculture, and to animals that has really been moved away from as we live in a completely different world in terms of agricultural products being available all the time today.
There are many examples, but one of my favorite is something that you can only actually achieve by forgetting something. And in the Torah, it's called shichicha, which means the act of forgetting. So if you're a farmer and you have harvested your crops, and then you have put down a sheaf of crops with the intention of coming back and getting it later on, but then you have forgotten to do that, at that moment, it is no longer yours, and the assumption is you are leaving it there for the poor and the needy and the vulnerable in your community and your society. And when we started the CSA, the Community Supported Agriculture Program, and we were working with our local farmers, we built into the program initially this idea that if you're a member of a CSA, you're supporting your farm, if you forget to pick up your share, we assume you're donating it to people who need it more. And we always had a list of families within our Jewish community who and beyond the Jewish community, and sometimes it will go to places like EFA and other food pantries, but we would donate that food. So that's one example. The other example is, giving a tenth of your produce, leaving the corners of your fields unharvested, pay us so that people who need it can come and take it. And there are ways in which we have learned those. And learning those laws when you're actually involved more with hands-on farming has been really amazing. With animals, when we started the initiative all those years ago about bringing this herd of goats and having this goat milking co-op, there are all kinds of, and with chickens too, when we had chickens, there are all kinds of laws about what happens to an egg if it's laid on Shabbat or it's laid on holidays and all this stuff. It's like, I studied some of it in rabbinical school, it always went over my head, but suddenly it's like, well, wait a minute, we are actually now producing goat milk and we are actually now producing eggs from our chickens. What do we do? And we started as a group sort of studying some of those laws and thinking about how they actually can have practical influence. That's a couple of examples.
I was going to ask if you could just give, I guess you started to, no, I don't want to stand up.
Hi.
Do I have to stand up?
No, I just didn't see where you were coming, where your voice was coming from.
Sorry. If you could just go into a little bit more detail about your, the goat co-op and sort of some of the tenets and what its purpose is.
Great. I mean, I think the fact that it's housed as part of the farming initiatives at the Boulder JCC, originally it was on land that didn't really, you know what, that piece of where the goats lived, it doesn't matter, they've moved around a bit. They're used to it by now. But the original, there were a couple of communities, I wasn't involved in the very, very beginning, there were a few people who said, we want to raise goats and we want to raise chickens because we want to support a local animal agriculture and we want to learn how to do that ourselves. So some of us set like a vision for ourselves to be a vegan apart from eating products that we were ourselves producing, which was certainly my goal. And then in that process, we acquired 3 does. The original 3 does were called alfalfa, thistle, and clover. And none of them are actually in the farm anymore, those 3 original ones. There's been many generations of goats since then. But the idea is it's a co-op. Excuse me, so different individuals and families belong to it. The goats are milked. At the moment, there are 4 that we are milking, and they're milked twice a day. So if you have, my shift is Sunday morning, so every Sunday morning, go and let the goats out and feed them their alfalfa and their grain and their veggies that Natural Grocers donates to us every day. And then we take care of the goats and we clean them and milk them, and then whatever milk we get, we keep for ourselves because they're milked twice a day, and that's basically the concept. But it's also, because it's housed at Milk and Honey Farm, and a big part of Farmer Becker and the vision of the farm at the JCC is to really teach young people about where our food comes from. So there's a lot of education that happens. So kids come and they meet the goats and they learn how to milk a goat, and they see where the milk is coming from rather than just buying a carton from King Super or whatever. So that's been a part of it too. And there are several open house events that we have. We tried doing goat yoga once, but I think I'm not into goat yoga. I'm into yoga and I'm into goats, but I'm not into goat yoga, if you know what I mean. Anything?
Thank you very much.
Oh, is there one more? Oh.
How? Is there time for one more?
As long as it's real quick.
He'll have to do it standing on one foot. How have the years with the goats and the chickens expanded your understanding of God?
Can you answer that in 10 seconds?
There are times where, even if it's not my shift, if I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed and a little down, I just go and spend time with the goats, and they give me, I love being around now. I don't have pets in my house, but like there's something about being around animals that are cared for and loved so deeply that I think just connects me to all of creation in that sense. I mean, I think for me, my personal spiritual relationship is seeing myself as not, that we read a couple of weeks ago, the story of creation. And it's easy to read it as when human form comes along, that the human form can just exploit the earth. But really, Reb Zalman and many of us in the Jewish environmental world certainly read it so totally differently. We're to be partners in creation. We're to be partners in the earth. in some sense, there's not that kind of hierarchy where we can just do what we like and plunder from the earth and abuse animals. On the contrary, we have to see ourselves as stewards. And so for me, having that kind of relationship with animals and changing my own relationship to food has definitely given me a greater sense of being a sort of co-partner in the creative process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Certainly, last but not least, is someone from our own CU Boulder community. Dr. Phoebe Young is Associate Professor of History and Director of Undergraduate Studies in the Department of History at CU Boulder. She teaches environmental and cultural history of the United States and the American West. She holds a Boulder Faculty Assembly Award for Excellence in Teaching and Pedagogy. Among her many publications, Phoebe's currently working on a new book entitled Camping Grounds, Public Nature in America from the Civil War to Occupy Wall Street. Sorry to cut the last two words off. Please join me in welcoming Professor Young.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here. A little bit of a tough last spot following that amazing music and a rabbi, no pressure. So thank you, Rebecca, for that wonderful introduction and for inviting me to participate tonight. As she mentioned, the work that I'm doing is on the history of camping and sleeping outside in modern America. And she thought I could come and maybe provide some backdrop or context with some of this work for these sort of histories of Jews out west and outdoors, and I'm really glad to do that. So I'm going to start with a kind of 30,000-foot view, appropriate perhaps, we are in the planetarium, of this work. And so let me first say that when we think about camping, what usually comes to mind is this kind of image, right? Recreational camping. And whether it's this form or Jewish youth camps or other experiences in nature, they tend to echo this definition. My work looks at the evolution of recreational camping, but as it evolved alongside and in tension with what I call functional camping, for which you might think of tramps or hobos in an earlier era, or people experiencing homelessness today, as well as with political camping, of which Occupy Wall Street is but the latest example in a longer history that goes back to, say, the Bonus Army marchers of the Great Depression, or Union Civil War veterans in the Grand Army of the Republic. And the 2017 camp of water protectors at Standing Rock also remind us of the displacement and dispossession of Native people upon which a large part of our outdoor recreational landscape rests. So for our purposes tonight, the recreational side of the story is the most salient, but I wanted to note the larger context so that we might think about the particularity of this practice, why we have decided that this is a meaningful form of leisure or culture, and that the embodied nature of sleeping outside is not unique to recreational camping. When and how such forms of outdoor life and expression are rendered beneficial or problematic is a complex story that I don't have time to tell tonight, but it does suggest the deep meaning that camping in particular has come to hold in American culture as a practice of citizenship and a modern method of possessing the land. Zooming down one level, maybe 10,000 feet, I'm going to point to three moments in the 20th century and into the 21st where we can see this broader meaning evolving from a sense of national belonging to family togetherness to self-discovery and renewal, and in which all of you, hopefully, can sort of build on, read into, and extend these stories. So, national belonging. Camping as an expression of American identity and even democracy got solidified in this sort of same era that camps like Schwader and JCC Ranch were established. Jewish camps and recreational camping, of course, had been around for some time, back to the 19th century. And in the 1920s, a fad for auto camping widened the appeal of outdoor leisure. By the 1930s, it was so popular that campers were scrambling all over each other and trampling the scenic wonders they had come to see. It was a plant pathologist, E.P. Meineke, who came up with the design for the Loop campground to save California's sequoia trees from destruction by throngs of campers. And if you've been to any public campground, you know how successful he was in convincing National Park Service bureaucrats to adopt his idea, because they still are everywhere. But he was successful not only because he, like the Lorax, spoke for the trees, but because he promoted the Loop as a model for an orderly experience of democracy, right, in the middle of the Great Depression, in providing Americans with welcoming and well-equipped campsites, with the now standard amenities of driveway, picnic table, and fire ring. He said, "The visitors to the outdoors are the guests of the nation, and in turn, the government provides friendly service to the individual in the quest for the satisfaction of fine and clean desires." It was a compelling formula. The outdoors and the campground both became ideal venues to embody the relationship between nation and citizen. More than visitors or guests, Meineke would go on to argue that camping on public lands entailed no less than claiming a stake in the land of the nation itself. It was the pleasure of finding and establishing one's temporary home on ground which one has a right of part ownership, even if only 130 millionth. This notion underwrote the massive expansion of state-sponsored, federally supported campgrounds as models for new relationships between state and citizen. And this campers' republic, as it were, typified a kind of new social contract and a recreational ethos, where mixing leisure with nature became the very grounds for national belonging. Family togetherness. By the 1950s, Americans began to populate this campers' republic with speed and enthusiasm. State and federal governments began to build loop campgrounds as fast as they could. And Americans came to expect the state to provide a low-cost campsite with modern amenities amidst a peaceful natural setting. And they wrote copiously to the National Park Service, the Forest Service, their state and federal legislators to make good on these promises, to build more campgrounds, better comfort stations. And many of them framed their argument as camper Doris Wood did in her 1958 letter to the Secretary of the Interior, no less. Families which camp together stay together. Camping gained acclaim during this Cold War era for being uniquely effective at achieving such mid-century family ideals, as well as social stability, bolstering the consumer economy, demonstrating upward mobility, and all around contributing to the moral campaign against Soviet communism. Recreating an outdoor version of the suburban neighborhood with loop upon loop of identically organized, well-equipped households sustained an image of affluent American leisure and natural abundance and supported the search for the peak togetherness experience. At the same time, these strong forces of inclusion generated powerful means of exclusion. To take one example, African Americans encountered a public nature that was less welcoming, and camping as an often segregated and risky proposition. Less democracy and togetherness, more surveillance and marginalization. As far back as the 1920s, the Park Service found accommodating African Americans to be, in their word, awkward, and established an unofficial policy of discouragement. Sentiments like those led Black communities in multiple regions, including here in Colorado, to establish private camps and resorts where they could control the environment themselves. And obviously there are some parallels to see here. And in the context of the growing federal and cultural commitment to camping, many African Americans saw federal campgrounds as a symbolic place to press their case for equal access. They too wrote the National Park Service, protesting the paltry and segregated campgrounds made available to them as an inexcusable violation of the letter and spirit of democracy, and kind of testament how strongly that connection between camping and democracy had taken hold. By the post-war years, as family camping was booming, so too were sleepaway camps for children. Nearly 5 million kids, or 12% of all children, school-aged children in the United States, were reportedly headed for public, private, or religious camps in the summer of 1959. If outdoor recreation had been good for American identity, for family togetherness, many extended that belief to the development of youth in the baby boom generation. Exposing city-bound children to nature, as Newsweek wrote that year, to trees and birds, comradeship and physical well-being, to teach them self-reliance and group cooperation, translated into a veritable summer camp frenzy. And the summer camp's unique combination of outdoor experience and group bonding became a popular vehicle to transmit particular forms of culture. But as baby boomers advanced into their teenage years, they became counselors and junior counselors who often strained against the structure and values of traditional summer camps. Camp directors were somewhat perplexed. As one put it in 1968, today's young counselors are different. Many of them come with a strong tendency to use camp for an expression of their social convictions and desires for social change. There is a tendency to demonstrate self-determination, to introduce new ways of life. This offered a kind of management problem. By the mid-60s, many of these young people began to look for new camping experiences that would allow them to express those social convictions, to foster a respect for nature, and to assist in self-discovery. New programs like the National Outdoor Leadership School, NOLS, established in 1965, developed a more rugged, adventure-based program to help youth develop wilderness skills, environmental sensitivity, and self-knowledge. Founded by the famous mountaineer Paul Petzold, at this college of camping, there would be no weaving of lanyards, no compulsory singing of jolly songs around the campfire. Clearly, he had not heard our musicians tonight. I think he would have had a different point of view. Instead, campers carry 40-pound packs, eat what they carry and find and catch, sleep in tents, read topographical maps to make their way through Wyoming's rugged Wind River mountain range. They emerged from the month-long trek having discovered astonishing reserves of strength and a new sense of self-reliance. Petzold, though in his late 50s when he established NOLS, embraced 60s youth and supported their immersion in wilderness as part of what he called their hunger for reality, their disdain for phony society where people talk one thing and do another, their desire for a world with a different set of values. And he hoped that this form of wilderness could offer a good opportunity to step back, to view their whole everything, and to discover themselves. As NOLS developed its messages and experience around the social and personal benefits of nature, it created an opening for countercultural impulses, a whole series of which we might call, as some sociological researchers did in the early 1970s, new naturalism, desires to commune with rather than conquer nature, to emphasize living close to the land, the natural over the artificial, sensory experience, and cooperative community. Of all the desires embedded in the new naturalism, NOLS most strongly dramatized the possibilities of nature as a vehicle for self-discovery. Publicity and teachings were shot through with language about young Americans finding themselves. Petzold tended to embed this language in affirmations of the need for adventure, which he said they were going to get one way or another, whether the old folks like it or not. And he promoted wilderness as a better tool for youthful escapades than LSD, marijuana, or hot rods, or a better way to discover themselves, get confidence, and learn what they can do. Students themselves, in fact, took this idea even further. More than self-confidence, they made it about finding their whole person, their natural self. As one student reflected in 1972, so many people in life, they're just running all over like chickens with their heads cut off. They don't really know where they're going or where they're at. Up here in the mountains, you learn where your head is. Camping became meaningful in new ways for a new generation in the 1960s and 1970s, and NOLS was a kind of prototype for this. And for many of the same reasons, backpacking became a popular pursuit. And as a practice, of course, backpacking was nothing new, even if it wasn't widespread. But in the context of the counterculture and the environmental movement, backpacking gained a new set of cultural associations. As Petzold put it in his popular 1974 guide, the outdoors, if you know how to handle it, is probably one of the least expensive and most rewarding ways of achieving self-renewal. So for those looking for seemingly less mediated interactions with nature, to get away from those overcrowded loop campgrounds and their traditional constraints, backpacking was a newly satisfying form of self-expression, a way to practice what Petzold called the new ethic of the wild outdoors, where ecologically sensitive forms of camping became tools of consciousness, expressions of our sense of responsibility towards Mother Earth. The link forged here between backcountry camping, environmental attitudes, and personal discovery became a lasting one. We can see it still in the standard imperative to leave no trace, in narratives like Cheryl Strayed's Wild, and even in more recent messages about the beneficial effects of nature on our brains and biologies, especially as so many of us are presumed to be suffering from nature deficit disorder. Maybe that's not so widespread here in Boulder, but it's certainly something the National Park Service has focused on. This last point I'll comment on in closing, just to bring it back to my initial framing and offer the standard historian's caution. Things that look natural are often the product of history. We are increasingly told that our bodies need nature, and we need it in this particular recreational form with the right collection of outdoor gear. And I will suggest that what we believe nature provides us, what it is for, is not rooted in our biologies, but has evolved historically. And not only in terms of national belonging, family togetherness, self-discovery, and now perhaps biological need, but also in the very elevation of recreational or over other outdoor experiences. Many people, myself included, do find genuine connections in the outdoors, to the natural world, to other people, to our inner selves, to our spirit and spiritual traditions. And in some ways, that is what makes nature such a potent cultural space. It fosters the possibility for connectedness beyond our political or economic worlds, even as the way we engage the outdoors is wholly shaped by our historical contexts. That sometimes those visions have tended to be exclusionary does not mean that there might not be more inclusive ways of connecting in and to the outdoors. We might start by acknowledging a paradox that while there's nothing natural about the driveway, picnic table, and fire ring as a route to communing with nature, they still serve as a platform for many of us to feel closer to nature. And beyond that, perhaps to become grounds for recognizing the connections between recreational, functional, political, and spiritual practices, and realizing the stakes we collectively hold in nature, especially in this moment of environmental crisis. Thanks.
We are running out of time, but I'd like to take one or two quick questions from the audience, if there are any, for Phoebe.
I'm curious, this is a little bit different time frame, but if you've made any connection between the Chautauqua movement of the late 19th century, early 20th, and those sorts of outdoor experiences with your work and your research.
Yes, thanks for that. Absolutely. I mean, I sort of chose to focus on the more 20th century aspects tonight, but Chautauqua movement, other kind of educational outdoor programs in the late 19th century, even going back to camp meetings, which were sort of religious, particularly connected to Christian traditions, had a long history of trying to connect people with the outdoors and sort of learning and community and those things. And so, yeah, they definitely were popular, particularly among middle-class folks who used Chautauqua as a way to both get a little bit of a vacation but feel like they were working hard at it, that they weren't sort of slacking off too much. They got some education with their nature. And a lot of those, it was, while many of them lived in cabins, wasn't what we might think of as camping, it definitely was part of the growing popularity of sort of outdoor leisure.
I'm curious how Occupy Wall Street and that movement fits into your narrative.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So I look at sort of the traditions of sort of using camping as a tool of political protest. And so you can see this across many decades in American history. And so Occupy Wall Street, I think, part of what I argue is that one of the reasons it became so sort of talked about in the media and the sort of story of it became about just the right to camp and the right to occupy space had a lot to do with how camping itself has become so meaningful to American tradition. It made it kind of part of what was its controversy, is because people saw them as a kind of not camping in the way you're supposed to camp, right? They were kind of transgressing the expectations of camping is supposed to be about leisure and sort of wholesome recreation. You're not supposed to be using it to kind of disrupt society. And so you do see some critiques of Occupy that are saying, well, if they can camp, right, for free in McPherson Square in DC or in City Hall grounds in Denver, then why shouldn't I be able to go camp if I just want to do it for fun? Right, and sort of pitting this question of, you know, who has more rights, those who are camping to make a political point or those who are camping for recreation, and that kind of standard expectation of what you're supposed to be doing in your tents really came to kind of frame the way some people looked at Occupy's sort of right to camp.
So I am conscious of time. We want to come back to the planetarium, so we don't want to overstay our welcome. But again, thank you for having us in such a beautiful and really engaging embodied space. We wanted to bring you this topic of Jews out west, just in closing, from both scholarly academic perspectives and also those who live and breathe embodied Judaism every day by bringing in practitioners and local leaders of the Jewish community. So again, I want to thank all of our presenters and again, all of you for coming and supporting and learning with us. And the learning continues in Norlin Library for the Jews Out West installation, which will be on display on the second floor. There's flyers about that out in the lobby. So please continue to visit us, and thank you again for coming.